Well, hey there folks, how's everybody doing? So I thought about doing a review of my Canon 5L, which is this camera right here, but I think it might be easier just to trace the history of these things and compare it to the P, which is the rangefinder from Canon, which everybody is most familiar with, and for good reason. It's just a fine machine, and I've done a prior review of this camera, and so I'm just going to essentially review its predecessor, the 5L, by simply highlighting the differences between these two cameras, which are, well, they are, I'll tell you what they are in just a minute. First, let's go over a brief history of Canon rangefinders in general. So back in the 1950s, the Canon rangefinder series was designated by Roman numerals. You had the 2 series, the 3 series, and the 4 series. And these were all Barnack-style bottom loaders. That is, they were modeled on and copies of the pre-war Leicas, which required that you remove the bottom plate and trim the film leader in order to load film into the camera. They were followed by the 5 series and the 6 series, which introduced the swing back and the very, very different design aesthetic. And I think the 5 and 6 series Canon rangefinders are the most aesthetically pleasing to look at in terms of industrial design. Some of the most attractive rangefinders and cameras in general, frankly, that's ever been made. I think they're just absolutely beautiful. And for the 7 series, which was introduced, I forget exactly when, if it was 59, 60, or 61, but the 7 series, they switched from the Roman numeral to the standard numeral, and I just wrote big and ugly because that's my personal opinion. You compare the 7 series to the 5 and 6, and it's just no contest. I mean, these are just beautiful and graceful and artistically designed. In the 7 series, well, it wasn't. Technically, it's certainly as competent as its predecessors, no doubt about that. It looks just as good on paper in terms of technical specs. I just think that they're larger than they need to be, and, well, just not as good looking as what came before. All right, so now we get into the 5 and 6 series. And the 5 and 6 series are as follows. You had what looks like VT and VL, but actually the V is the Roman numeral 5, T means trigger, and L means lever. The T and the L, trigger and the lever, refer to the method of film advance. So this is the lever version here, and the lever means this. This is the lever, okay? The trigger was a mechanism on the bottom of the camera, which I've never seen one, I've never used one, but my understanding is it stows flush with the bottom, but then you pop it out and you sort of pull it like this in order to advance the film. And it never quite caught on. Back in the 1950s, the lever that we take for granted, or that we took for granted by the late 1960s, and which was the standard method of film advance up until the late 80s, early 90s, it hadn't standardized yet. You still had knob advance cameras, you had these trigger advance cameras, lever advance. The industry had not settled on a convention. So the T indicated the trigger advance style, and the L stood for this lever advance style. Then in the 6 series, we had the 6L, the 6T, and the P. And the 6 indicated, obviously, Roman numeral 6. And the L was lever advance, the T was trigger advance, just as in the 5 series. And then the P was the budget or the economy version. At least that was the intention, although frankly there's nothing budget or economy about the Canon P. It was the P was in essence a slightly simplified 6L, and the P stood for populaire. And well, it was in fact quite popular. It was very successful. All right, so what are the differences between this, the 5L, and this, the P? Number one, shutter speed dial. You notice on the P has a conventional, or what I would consider conventional, because I learned photography on the SLRs of the 1970s, and this is what the shutter speed dials looked like. They just, it was clearly marked, easy to turn, and here's your index mark right there. And so, they're just, you know, not much to say about it. It's just simple and easy to use. The predecessor, on the 5 series, somewhat less so. Again, this is a technological issue. It is less advanced, and it has the same shutter speed range, but you have the separate high-speed dial and low-speed dial here in the front. And in order to change the shutter speed, you lift and set back. And you notice, like, for example, for the speeds 1,500 and 250, the setting is indicated by these tiny little dots, which are right next to one another. It is just, again, these are cameras for people with young, healthy eyes. You get a little older, you start wearing reading glasses, and it becomes a major, major hassle because you can easily set the wrong speed. You got to hold this thing up to your face in order to make sure you got the right one. But there's 500, there's 250, okay. 125 is a little easier, a little spaced a bit further. 60, obviously, okay. X flash. I have no idea what the flash synchronization speed of this camera is. I do not use flash with old rangefinders. And here I set here the marking says 1 to 30. So now I've turned control over to the low speed dial here, and it goes 15, 8, 4, 2, and 1 full second, and T, and we have a T setting, which is a time setting down there, and then we have a B setting, which is a bulb setting up there, and both of which are used for long exposures. I'm not going to get into the fine distinctions between the two. But I think that's actually, you know what, I think that's the only difference functionally between, or in terms of capabilities, between this camera and the P, because the P has a bulb setting but not a time setting. If you do long exposure photography, then that may be worth looking into, but I don't, so I'm not going to try to explain something which I do not fully understand. Okay, number 2, the viewfinder. This is kind of a big deal. So the 5 series viewfinder is here. And you turn this, well, what today we would call a command dial. I'm not sure. You turn this dial here, and there are 3 settings. This 50 for 50 millimeter, and you're not changing frame lines. You're actually changing the magnification in the viewfinder. 50 for 50 millimeter equivalent, or 50 millimeter framing, 35 for 35 millimeter lens framing, and RF simply means that the entire viewfinder is now taken up by the rangefinder spot. And the purpose of this, obviously, is to facilitate accurate focusing, because now you don't have a rangefinder spot in the center of the frame. Rather, the entire frame is the rangefinder spot. And these are the capabilities offered by the viewfinder in the 5 series. Likewise, this style viewfinder was also used in the 6 series for the 6L and 6T. I believe that's true. I've never seen one of those cameras, but what I've read online indicates that was so. So this was the style of viewfinder, which was then replaced in the P with a much simpler design. You notice the P does not have the rotating viewfinder. Rather, what you have here are frame lines for 35, 50, and 35, 50, and 100, isn't it? Yeah, 35, 50, and 100. And no rotating, nothing moves. Arguably, that may be an advantage, because the fewer moving parts a mechanism has, the less that can break. And when you're dealing with equipment that's as old as this stuff, that becomes kind of important. So I think one might be able to make the case that this is actually preferable in the long term. But nonetheless, it's a difference, and that's difference number 2 is the viewfinder. Number 3 is parallax compensation. So the frame lines of the P are parallax compensated automatically. As you focus the lens, the mechanism will automatically adjust the frame lines in the viewfinder to adjust for parallax. That's very convenient. It's a nice feature of the Canon P. The 5 series doesn't do that. Rather, it has an interesting method of parallax compensation facilitated by this little ball bearing right there, okay? So this little ball bearing will mate to a similar ball bearing on some, but not all, Canon accessory viewfinders. Here's a Canon accessory viewfinder for 100 millimeters. You see on the bottom of this accessory viewfinder, you've got that little ball bearing. So this ball bearing mates with this one, and this is the method by which the camera communicates parallax compensation to this viewfinder. So this viewfinder on this camera will automatically compensate for parallax, which is a nice, convenient feature. Not all Canon viewfinders do that. For example, here is a slightly older Canon accessory viewfinder for an 85 millimeter lens. There is no ball bearing on the bottom, and you see on the back settings for manual parallax correction marked in feet. Okay, so you have to you have to do this in order to correct for parallax on this particular accessory viewfinder. Okay, and likewise, the automatic parallax correcting feature on this viewfinder will not work on the P, because the P does not have that little ball bearing. So that automatic parallax correction feature is missing from the P. So that was one of, excuse me, that was one of the features which was deleted. The rotating viewfinder and that parallax correction ball bearing mechanism here were deleted from the 6L, and I think those are the major differences between the 6L and the P, but don't quote me on that. I've never owned a 6L, so I can't say that with absolute certainty. Okay. So basically, given these three differences, these are the three major differences. I'm sure that some collector is going to be watching this video and leave a comment telling me that there are, a few others that I missed out on, and maybe there are. I'm not an expert, but I do own these cameras. I have used them, and I am familiar with the major differences in terms of the functionality and how most people would go about using the camera, and this is it. So if you're familiar with the P, then everything that you know about the P plus this will tell you everything you need to know about the 5L. And that is what will suffice for my review of the Canon 5L rangefinder. I hope you found this video informative or amusing, or a combination thereof. And if so, please do like, subscribe, and as always, check out the links below. Take care now. Bye-bye.